remarkable sense of occasion, making hundreds in his first and last Test match innings and 2 centuries in his first Test as captain. He was a commanding and cultured player. Aloof, elegant and complex, Greg Chappell is one of ESPN's legends of cricket.
You look for 3 here, and it gives him his 100, his first 100 in England.
In the second Test of the 1972 Ashes series at Lord's, Greg Chappell played perhaps his finest innings.
Lord's in 72 was probably my best Test innings. Physically and mentally, I think it was as well as I played at any stage during my Test career.
It's a fine shot, and he needn't run for that.
The thing that I reflect on over that innings was I didn't make a mental mistake until the ball I got out. I don't think I concentrated as well as that very often in my Test career. So given the conditions, given the state of the game, I rate that as my best Test innings.
Enormous crowd, all on their feet.
When he came out, there was a very English thing to do. There was a standing ovation, and the whole ground stood up and applauded as he walked out. And you don't see that so much these days in quite that degree. It was a stunning innings, absolutely stunning.
That knock that we're talking about is probably, close to one of his finest. He was just a young man, so very committed, very focused. It probably confirmed his status as one of the greats of the future game.
People like Railingworth and John Snow, who bowled to that 131, said it was absolutely masterly, and he really was elegance personified.
Chappell gets out of that one, and it's 4 runs.
By the mid-70s, Greg Chappell was arguably the finest batsman in the world, and certainly the most elegant.
He always carried himself so well, the adjectives are always flowing as far as Greg Chappell was, because he just looked a terrific player.
He was the best batter in my time, and that encompasses a lot of blokes. Me and Dad, Barry Richards, Clive Lloyd, used to run all in Canai. Greg Chappell was an absolute machine. And the hardest thing I ever found was when I looked at his average 50-odd, 52 at a guess Test, and Bradman was twice as good as him. That was very hard to understand, because I just thought he was a freak.
Short, hooked away in the air.
He covered drove and straight drove, hit the ball through mid-wicket. Anything that was straight went through that area. I think that his real trait was the fact that he never really got bogged down. Very often with players of his class, they tend to become infatuated with making big scores. Greg Chappell never gave me that impression at all. He was an unselfish cricketer.
Greg Chappell was always an artist. He was never, you could never classify him as a scorer of bowling, but he clinically destroyed bowlers.
Greg Chappell was very much the stylist as a batsman, very upright. In fact, if you look at any of the coaching manuals, you could probably draw a template over Greg Chappell and work from that. Eyes, wrists, bat, feet, all in a straight line. And he used to build his innings on the Greg Chappell V.
Cairns, driving it down very straight on the offside.
Greg Chappell was a very difficult batsman to bowl to. I first came across him as a very young man, my first tour to Australia. And because Greg Chappell pretty much played in the V, straight up and down as much as he possibly could, and perhaps later on he would expand the play, cut shots and pull shots. He didn't take too many risks, and he was a batsman that had an excellent technique, especially for those hard Australian pitches. He was a tall guy, very relaxed, very upright, and he just played straight down the pitch and made it very difficult for bowlers.
Chappell. They're playing across this one, a loud appeal, and Morrison is out.
With the ball, he was a useful change bowler who was capable of surprising top-order batsmen.
Bowled, clean bowled by Greg Chappell.
And in the slips, Chappell was one of the finest in the game.
Oh, that's a good one. Was going very fast indeed.
Not too many better fielders, whether catching in slips or as an outfielder. Can't remember him making too many errors in the field, so you know, you've got a complete cricketer there.
It's in the air, what a catch! Taken by Chappell, that gives him the record number of catches, 121 catches.
Greg Chappell, the middle of 3 test-playing brothers, was schooled in tough cricket from an early age.
Yeah, our test matches in the backyard were pretty willing affairs. Our father encouraged us to play our cricket seriously, whatever we were doing. He encouraged us to play with a hard ball from a very early age, so we got to know what a hard ball was like. That was the good news. The bad news was he didn't provide us with any pads and gloves, so we got to find out what a hard ball felt like. But it was good. I mean, Ian's 5 years older, so he was bigger and stronger, so I copped a pretty good workout from a very early age.
Greg and I had some pretty good battles in the backyard. It was interesting when we first started playing together in the South Australian side. We had a couple of run-outs, and people were saying to me, you two, you sure you're brothers? You've got no understanding when you run between wickets. And I said, well, it's not surprising. I said, because we've never played together. You know, the only time we've played really on the same field was in the backyard. And I said, he was an opponent. He was England, I was Australia. And so that's how I always looked upon Greg, as an opponent.
With 3 seasons of Shield cricket behind him, Chappell began his test career with a century in Perth against England in the 1970-71 Ashes series.
The best thing from my point of view was that when I went out there, Ian Redpath was the not-out batsman, and Redder's very experienced, very tough test cricketer, and I think basically England had decided that I wasn't worth worrying about. If they got Redders out, then it was all over. I learned a lot about batting in test cricket just from batting with Ian Redpath on that day, and you know, I took a long time to get 50, and the second 50 came quite quickly.
In 1971-72, he played in a series against a rest of the world team and averaged more than 100.
And that was the first time I'd really worked hard mentally and prepared myself and concentrated. You know, had worked out a system of concentration that I was able to take through the rest of my career, and I think that was probably my greatest asset.
In the last test of the 1972 Ashes tour, Greg and Ian Chappell became the first brothers to score a century in the same innings of a test match.
Jean and Martin, our parents, were at the ground, so they saw it. And Trevor was also, he was playing club cricket in London, I think, playing a bit of seconds cricket with Surrey. So they were there that day to see it. So I remember thinking afterwards that it was sort of, that was sort of payback for all the time and effort that Jean and Martin had put in to help us get to that, or to give us a chance to get to that point. The fact that they were actually there on such a famous occasion for the Chappell family, I sort of felt, well, at least we've repaid them a little bit for what they did for us.
After the Ashes tour, Chappell scored centuries at home against Pakistan, then scored more than 1,000 runs on a tour of the West Indies, the first Australian to do so.
The tour of the West Indies, 73, was probably one of the great tours as far as my cricket career was concerned. I mean, I enjoyed the conditions there, the fast outfields as well. I mean, if you picked the gap, you got value for runs. So it was a tour that I look back on with a great deal of fondness, because it was also a very successful tour for us as a team.
In the 1973-74 season, Chappell moved from Adelaide, his hometown, to captain Queensland.
What interested me was the fact that they offered the captaincy of the Queensland team. Ian was captain of South Australia and he was captain of Australia, and he was probably going to be captain of South Australia as long as he was captain of Australia. In the back of my mind, I thought I'd loved the opportunity of captaining of Australia when the opportunity came. And if that was going to happen, then I probably needed a bit of experience before it happened. I wasn't going to get it in South Australia. It was probably the best thing that I did from a personal point of view, from a cricket point of view, from a family point of view, and from a business point of view. The opportunities in Queensland at that stage, the timing was just perfect. more by good luck than good judgment. I went to Queensland at a time when it was just taking off, and I look back on that period from a cricket and a life point of view as being a very enjoyable and a great life experience.
In early 1974 against New Zealand, the Chappell brothers both scored centuries in each innings of a test match.
Ian and I both made hundreds in each innings of that game, which was definitely the first time, probably the only time that brothers have done that. It was my highest scoring game, 247 not out in the first innings, 133 out in the second innings. Actually, I was a bit disappointed when Ian declared in the first innings, because I reckon if ever I was going to make 300 in a test match, that was it. And I told him so, but he quite rightly pointed out that if we were going to win the game, we had to declare then and hope that we could bowl New Zealand out. But as I pointed out to him, Blind Freddie could have got runs on that wicket, so it wasn't really going to be a game that there was going to be a result in. We might as well get in for our chop. But he made the right decision.
In the summer of 1975-76, the West Indies arrived in Australia fresh from winning the inaugural World Cup. Greg Chappell became the Australian captain for the series. It was perhaps the finest debut by a captain in history.
Going out onto the field as captain for the first time, I was excited, obviously, probably a little bit nervous. Ian was still in the side. The previous captain was there, and he's also my older brother, who'd been pretty critical of me most of my life, so I was expecting that it'd probably be no different.
75-76, my debut in Australia, bowling to Greg Chappell was pretty difficult. I was a very inexperienced player. Greg Chappell, very good player, played pretty much in the V, up and down the pitch, didn't take too many risks. And of course, with such a fine technique and such an upright stance, the Australian pitches suited him. He didn't find too many batsmen that were pitching up for drives in Australia, so he was so upright in anything that was just short for a length. He would go on his back foot and still punch it straight back past you.
Dennis Lilly took the ball to bowl the first over. I think I had 5 slips and 2 gullies. I had a third man. I didn't have a third man. I had a fine leg. Probably had a bat pad, and it was after the third ball of the over I realised I didn't have anyone in front of the wicket on the offside, so surreptitiously I sort of pretended that I'd intended to do that, but I just slipped one of the blokes out of the gully cordon and just put him in front of the wicket on the offside. I thought that might be a sensible move. How Ian had stood there for 3 balls and let it go by, I've no idea. It was great restraint, especially coming from him. Batting in that test match was pretty difficult. To have scored a century in the first innings, as I did, was one thing. But the second innings, we'd lost a couple of early wickets, and Ian and I put on a partnership that finished up getting us home. I was able to accelerate towards the end of the innings, and I think, I'm pretty sure Ian sat back and gave me as much of the strike as he could to allow me to get my second 100 of the game. But most importantly, from my point of view, I'd got through my first test match as captain pretty much unscathed.
I always thought Greg was a very good captain, and he took over with Lillian Thompson after Ian had retired, and he did a very good job. Wonderful batsman, a very, very astute thinker and good tactician, Greg Chappell.
The late 70s saw World Series cricket tear the game apart. As part of the Packer circus, Greg Chappell found himself up against the best the world had to offer.
I learned more about myself in that period of 2 years as a player and as a person than at any other stage in my career. I rate some of the innings that I played during that period as the best innings I ever played. I'd probably got away in Test cricket up to that point using about 75 or 80% of my talent. I had to use every ounce of it during that period of World Series cricket, and it took me to another level as a player.
When cricket reunited, Greg Chappell was once again appointed captain of the Australian Test side.
For the next 3 or 4 years after World Series cricket, it was pretty difficult as we all came to grips, administrators and players, came to grips with the new era of cricket. 2 touring teams and all that sort of stuff. And as Australian captain and being the focal point from the playing point of view at that stage, I know I found it pretty onerous, the extra sort of work that I had to do behind the scenes, just in discussions and so on, trying to get the administrators to include us again, or for the first time, in their discussions.
Well, he's hit this one up. Richard Hadley making a very good attempt, but it's 4 runs, and that's the 100 for Greg Chappell.
From 1979 to 1981, the Australians were subjected to a punishing schedule of matches. The pressure finally told when Greg ordered his brother Trevor to bowl underarm, thus preventing New Zealand from scoring from the last ball of a one-day international.
The underarm incident was really a culmination of all that frustration that 3 or 4 years following World Series cricket, arguing with the administrators that everything that was wrong with the programming, with having 2 touring teams and 15 or 16 one-day games, 6 test matches, impacted against the Australian team being successful. It's not an excuse for what happened on that day at the Melbourne Cricket Ground, but it's an explanation for where I was at physically and mentally by the time we got to that game. The easy explanation for the underarm was that it was all about not losing a game. That was probably about 10% of what it was all about. It was a cry for help. It was a statement that I had certainly had enough of it.
In the 1981-82 series, Chappell's form slumped.
And I think I was starting to get to the stage in life with a young family and so on, where all of a sudden cricket wasn't the only thing in my life. It wasn't the be-all and end-all of my life. And for the first time, my attention was diverted from the cricket. I got into a slump, and then I got into this sort of downward spiral of becoming anxious and worrying about failing rather than thinking about being successful. And it took me, it was an education process to work my way through it and to come out the other side. I was certainly a better player and hopefully a better person and a better captain for it.
I think Greg's best captaincy was done when he went through that poor trot with the bat. Greg, certainly as a batsman, and I'd probably say as a captain, was a bit of a perfectionist. And I don't think he totally understood that people could be trying their guts out and fail, because he was such a good player and he was so successful. But when he was going through a bad trot, I think he suddenly discovered that you can be trying really hard and you get out.
It's a very classy little shot. And there's 150 for Greg Chappell.
He hit himself back into form with 176 in 218 deliveries against New Zealand in early 1982.
And we were in big trouble, and because I was going out to bat and Greg was about 70, I'd say, at a guess. And he said, he said, just hang around with me and watch this.
To Chappell, short, hooked in the air.
Now I sat there, best seat in the house. Hadley's trying to bowl to him, Hadley in his heyday, and Greg and these other guys on a wicket, suited the bowlers, just belted them around. I was at the other end. He said, just play a couple. If you get up there, keep them out. He said, I'll do the rest.
What I always really loved about watching Chappell again was his front foot play. He was obviously a very complete player. Had strokes all around the wicket, but for me it was when Chappell was on the drive. That was the time where a stadium stood transfixed. It was real MCC textbook stuff, and executed with a style and panache and grace that was all his own.
Quite an incredible scene. Greg Chappell cheered all the way up to the middle, and this is last test match.
Greg Chappell left the Test arena with one last glorious performance in 1984.
I remember the feeling when Mohsin Khan threw the overthrows that allowed me to get the 4 runs that took me past Bradman's mark. It just took a big weight off my shoulders. I mean, it wasn't something that I felt that I had to do, but it was just something that it was there, and because it was being talked about, I was well aware of it, and it just seemed to lift a weight off my shoulders, and from that point on I actually started to bat a lot better. Up until then it had been pretty scratchy, and it was more determination than anything else that had got me through.
got that through. 4 more to Chappell. 150 up for Greg Chappell.
And so one of Australia's greatest ever batsmen finished as he'd begun, commanding and brilliant.
It was a pretty emotional one for him, and one which I know the day before he wasn't looking forward to, because he knew it was his last one. And I think the biggest battle he made on that day was the emotional one, rather than the innings itself. I think to overcome his own emotions was probably the thing that was his greatest achievement out of that innings.
Chappell was never a lovable larrikin in the style of Walters, Lilly or Botham. On the field, he was in control and always serious, but amongst his peers, he showed a different side to his character.
Well, he always gives that impression, doesn't he? The real business-like, serious, and opposed to his brother, who always looked a bit sort of more ruffled and, the real Aussie look. Greg looked more like the English gentleman sort of style, wasn't it? But, mate, there's a wolf in sheep's clothing, that guy, yeah. No, Greg's one of the boys.
I think Greg, as a batsman, was ruthless. He would just, keep taking it to the cleaners. Whereas, I tended to get a bit, I've got plenty here. I'll try and score a bit more quickly, and I'd always do something silly.
I think there was a lot more of a larrikin element in me than I ever probably let on. Within the team and around the team and behind the scenes, I was quite happy to let that be seen. But once I was out on the ground, it was business for me, and I tended to focus on what I was doing, and the larrikin element was probably disguised a little bit.
In Test matches, Greg Chappell scored 7,110 runs at an average of 53.86. He was the first Australian to score 7,000 Test runs. He took a world record 122 catches. In 74 one-day internationals, he scored 2,331 runs at an average of 40.19, including 3 centuries.
He was an arrogant player, confident player, and he brought that to the middle as soon as he arrived. There was no sort of, he's vulnerable at the start, he's hesitant, he exuded confidence as soon as he came to the crease, and that's a little bit of arrogance which doesn't go amiss. He had absolute confidence in his own ability, he knew what he could do, and he knew, I think, that he was better than most.
I learned a lot from him, just from watching him, observing him, the way he went about his practice routines, the way he handled himself in public, the way he controlled a cricket team and matches in general. So yeah, I put him down, rate him very highly as a bloke that I learned a lot off.
I love the way he played his cricket. Greg, for me, was one of those flowing drivers of a cricket ball. Having said that, he could play almost every shot in the book. An aggressive cricketer, I think, was burdened with the captaincy. I think he enjoyed just to be Greg Chappell, the batsman. Perhaps more so than that, Greg Chappell, the all-rounder, because, he was a brilliant fieldsman. People tend to think about Greg Chappell as a batsman, and they forget how brilliant he was in the slip cordon in particular, effortless catcher of a cricket ball, and, of course, was a very useful medium pacer as well.
Greg Chappell's the classical player of the last 30-odd years or more, and in that way, he'll always be remembered because he played classical shots and the shots that will stay in your memory.
He will always be admired for his stylish batting and superb catching. His captaincy steered Australia through one of its most successful eras. And for his place amongst Australia's finest, Greg Chappell is one of ESPN's legends of cricket.